We're back for the second segment of our show on water with Pava Ogren and Mike Wynn. We're going to talk about the future of water in the county. Now, if you missed the first show, maybe we'll run it again. But they did once say, a long time ago, that more people have died over water rights in the state of California than over mining gold. So water has always been a problem in the state of California. When I first moved here in the 60s, I was told that California is a dry state. It's supposed to be a desert. And they've decided they don't want it to be a desert. So, as we know with Los Angeles, they took the water from the Owens Valley, they took the Colorado River water, they took the state water, and now Los Angeles needs more water too. Well, it looks like, after our first show, we could use a little more water here too. So other than going out and doing a rain dance, which I'm planning for this afternoon when you're gone, I will go out in the backyard, I'll do a rain dance, and maybe it'll rain, I'll wash the car, I'll do everything I can to get rain for the county. But, okay, what are we going to do? The first question is, as usual, if I don't address either one of you, are there plans for getting more water throughout the county? Any separate special places or any special plans?
Mike, do you want to talk about Nipomo first?
Well, in Nipomo we have plans, but we're really researching the options. Long-term, the only long-term sustainable water supply is desal, taking ocean water, treating it, raising it to a high standard and using it. It's not political water except the permitting process. It doesn't depend on having lots of voters in order to get a fair share of it. And it's likely to remain in place as long as the Pacific Ocean is there. But that's a very expensive option, very expensive. We're also looking at a pipeline to the city of Santa Maria, who's willing to sell us some water. The price is being negotiated, the permits are being discussed. The engineering is not simple. They use a different system of making sure their water is clean than we do, so there's retrofitting on our wells, chlorines instead of chloramines, that sort of thing. But then the third source that we're looking at is seeing if there's any way to go back and re-examine the old question about the Central Coast Water Authority pipeline that goes through. Is there some way that we could get some water from that pipeline? It doesn't seem likely, but it has to be explored. But then the fourth option isn't new water. It just says, can we use our current water more wisely, more frugally, so that it goes farther? And that's really the most cost-effective water we can get.
Yes, I should say if you don't throw it down the drain, you've got it. But during the last drought, we had a lot of water conservation things enforced, and then we sort of let that go by once we had a couple of years of a lot of rain. So, of course, that's, like you say, the most cost-effective. They don't have to do much to start that one. The rest of the county, what are you planning on?
Well, Adele, I think you pointed to a good thing in terms of using water during a drought period, because if you live in California, you really should anticipate that in a drought period, you're going to have cutbacks. Certainly some communities are more water wealthy than other communities are, but short-term drought conditions are going to require some pretty significant conservation. The city of San Luis Obispo in the last drought certainly had mandatory conservation. And then even after they came out of the drought, though, the changes in habits and the efficiency use of water has resulted in that they've also been able to reduce their long-term water demand quite significantly. Los Osos Community Services District since 2000 has dropped their water production by about 15 to 20%.
Production or use?
Well, production. Use has also dropped, and that's a combination of them going into their pipeline, their pipes and their laterals, and fixing leaks and everything. So in addition to water efficiency measures, also proper maintenance of the infrastructure, what's delivering the water, can certainly help with the situation overall. On a countywide basis, in terms of new water supplies, it's certainly the Nacimiento Water Project that's being implemented today that has got the most significant source of new water to the county. That water supply was contracted for back in the 1950s.
Never taken.
That's correct, and we always maintain the right. And with the current project that's being developed, that's going to use about 60% of the right to the lake. And so there's still an additional amount that's going to be available for future users out of Nacimiento.
I mean, if there's water in it.
Yeah,
The drought dropped it way down.
What's interesting about our agreements with Monterey County Water Resource Agency is that we have the highest right to the water in the lake. So even when the lake is very, very low, we can still get our annual entitlement out of it.
Okay, even though we have the years we haven't taken, we can't backtrack for the years we didn't take it.
Yeah, you can't
Too
backtrack.
bad.
But still, it's a large lake, and our draw on it is approximately 5% of the annual draw. And with the higher water rights than Monterey County has to the lake water, it's a very reliable source. When we turn to state water, which certainly has more reliability concerns with regard to both droughts as well as the current operations of the state system and how the water flows through the delta. Again, the advantage in San Luis Obispo County on the supply is that our current allocation is 25,000 acre-feet per year, but our municipal demand is less than 5,000 acre-feet per year. So it's a very reliable source for our contracting agencies like Morro Bay and Pismo Beach. And we do believe that it does have a future for some additional supplies, although limited, but also to work into a drought buffer program.
And to take it out at the one cutoff, not to make a new cutoff, not to make a new entree into it.
Yeah, there are some possibilities for new participants into the State Water Project, but since that's a project that has contracts with San Luis Obispo County, Santa Barbara County, Central Coast Water Authority, the municipalities who are participating in it, and the California Department of Water Resources, any changes in the permanent delivery of water through that system is going to have to go through multiple agencies and a lot of scrutiny. Nevertheless, what we are doing at the county is we develop, and it's been in decades, and we update it, and that's called the Countywide Master Water Plan. And some of our objectives in that the next update to the Countywide Master Water Plan is how can these water sources be used not just on a permanent basis, but also for protection during droughts. Certainly each agency that's a water purveyor, whether it's like the Napomo Community Services District or the cities, they have the primary responsibility to make sure that they have adequate water for their permanent needs and have plans in cases of droughts. But at the county, what we want to do is say, okay, what other types of backstops can we help provide, especially in droughts, and especially to some of the smaller communities who, quite simply, the affordability of having multiple supplies is very, very difficult.
Right. Now, I want to go back to desal. Have you solved the problem where you're going to put the waste?
Well, there's three big problems with desal. First, can you afford the power?
Yes.
And the state legislature actually passed a bill, and the governor signed it in this last session, saying that you can create the power in one place, photovoltaic, let's say, and then take it off the grid in another place.
Feed it in and take it off.
So we wouldn't have to put a lot of ugly power installations in the coastal zone, which is important. The next problem, of course, is getting the water out of the ocean, and that is largely being solved by taking it below the surface of the sand. So all the larvae and the microorganisms are filtered out naturally, and you're not killing off sea life.
Not just sucking it off like they do at Diablo for the cooling.
Exactly. But the discharge is always the problem. That's the most difficult problem, because the concentration of brine is going to be higher than it would be naturally in the ocean.
Well, I once read that Kuwait gets all their water that way. Of course, they can afford anything, all right? Finances mean nothing. But do they just dump it back in the ocean?
I don't know exactly what Kuwait does.
It'd be very interesting to find out how, because they've done it for years.
I don't see large groups of environmentally sensitive people in Kuwait.
I guess you have a point there. Okay, so obviously we don't know what they do.
Well, there are a number of facilities, though, in the United States where the brine is discharged back into the ocean. Those would be the older facilities. And I think what Mike is doing is he's accurately speaking to what is going to be the challenges of the new facilities.
The new environment, because because you're going to then have to conform to a lot more rules than they did in the old days.
Indeed.
And of course, even when you develop a new solution like pumping brackish water out of sand dunes, that certainly provides advantages, because then you're not having the direct impact on ocean life. If the sand dunes happen to, though, have a lot of organic matter in there from prior vegetation that had lived there, you might be pumping out that organic matter, which on your typical membranes for desalinization facilities would foul them up, clog them up, and so then you have to have pre-treatment.
Not to mention the sand that you're going to be pumping through.
Well, hopefully you're not pumping any sand, but
if you're pumping through sand, your
wells and stuff and your screens in the wells should prevent the larger sand particles.
I'm saying you're probably going to have more than if you're pumping through adobe or through clay,
Yes.
like they do for most wells. You're pumping through a less porous surface. When you're bringing up your water, stuff is not leaching into it from the sides like you would from a sand well.
Well, the Nipomo Mesa is one of the largest sand dunes in the North
Yes.
American continent, so all of our wells are
Coming with
very
sand.
adept at screening out sand.
So you know how to do it already. Well, it'll be interesting to watch you. And Morro Bay's got they're taking theirs straight from the ocean, aren't they?
No, they also pump from sand wells that are in the sand dunes. Theirs is an example where they have some pre-treatment challenges, historically have, because of the organic matters that they can pick up out of those wells. But these technical issues certainly are things that the water resource engineers in doing designs can solve. The energy costs for desalinization are significant. And then, as Mike had pointed out previously, the permitting issue is also very significantly. The California Coastal Commission has a lot of resource responsibilities, and desalinization facilities are one that they're looking at very closely.
Everybody has always felt that the answer to California's whole water shortage all along the coast will be desalinization because it has so much coast. Do you think there'll be a point where we will have to sacrifice some of the Coastal Commission's other things to the need for getting water?
I can't speak for the Coastal Commission, but I think it makes sense to have a lot more desal along the coast because coastal farming is critically important to the economy of not only our local economies, but the state economy. And if we can put urban populations on desal, at least as a major supplier, then the groundwater can be reserved for farming, and we're not just buying up farmland and paving it over.
If you do have it, let's say Morro Bay's or Nipomo gets a good one, would you consider being in the position to sell your water to somebody else? Would you be doing it just to fill your needs, or would then it become something to be...
Well, I'm not going to speak for the board in terms of policy,
Right,
but it makes sense that what we need is regional solutions. So everybody having a little desal plant in his backyard is not a good way to go. Larger scale plants are more efficient. Membrane technology is getting great, so they're bigger and they last longer. And a plant that supplied Nipomo, supplied northern Rio Grande on the Mesa, supplied maybe some to Oceano if they needed it. Things like this make better sense than everybody going it alone and doing their own thing.
No, sounds logical to me for whatever that's worth, yes.
And that is
work
part
together.
of the state of California's California Water Plan. They have been developing with local agencies integrated regional water management plans. San Luis Obispo County has produced what we call an IRWM plan, as well as most municipalities and most regions throughout the state of California. I listened to an interesting speech from a deputy director of the Department of Water Resources who just sort of did the confession that California is too big for them to manage any longer, and so they have been sort of pushing the issue of the development of regional plans so that we at the regional level can identify for them in Sacramento what it's going to take in order to solve some of the problems that
It seems
exist.
like we're talking about community involvement of more than one community, joint sharing of assets and problems and working it out together. Do you have hope for that? Because quite often there's a lot of conflict between a city and the county that surrounds it. One city and another city, do you have hope for the future?
There are tremendous advantages to working together.
Oh, yes.
And it's not just they're more efficient. When you go out for grants and you're looking for resources from state or federal government, the fact that a number of agencies are working together gives you a much better chance of getting funding than if you were a dog in the manger.
Yeah, and I'm optimistic about the
You
future.
are.
Yeah, there's two really good recent examples. One was just simply the development of the Nacimiento project, where the North County agencies and the city of San Luis Obispo, it's a county project, but we really had to sit down with those different communities and develop a contract that was agreeable to all of them. And I think that that's a really good example of local agencies who had historically been sort of in the quote-unquote water wars with each other, sitting down and figuring out a cooperative solution to joint water challenges. The other example is, as Mike was mentioning, the pursuing of the grants and this integrated regional water management planning that we've been doing. Certainly right now our grant efforts are focusing in on trying to bring in some money, grant money to Los Osos. And I was very pleased to see the individuals who are on the Water Resource Advisory Committee recognizing some of the high priorities that exist in Los Osos and supporting Los Osos in those grant efforts.
Well, that is a very, very welcome thing to somebody like me who's been here for over 35 years and has watched the conflicts between different agencies within the counties and the cities and the counties. We're going to take another drinking water break, a quickie, and then we'll be back with you in just a few seconds with Pavo and Mike Wynn talking about the future of water in San Luis Obispo County. We're back at the last little segment of the second show on water in San Luis Obispo County with Mike Wynn from Nipomo, Pavo Ogren from the County of San Luis Obispo. Well, we just heard the most exciting news in the whole program so far. You are getting cooperation between cities and county and things like that, because like I say, when I first moved here, that was one of the biggest problems. Everybody was out for their own self. Now they're beginning to realize, at least in water, there has to be some cooperation or we're going to have problems.
That's right, Adele. And I'll tell you that the county and the cities are all working well together, too. Ron Mund, for example, who's done exemplary work here in the city of San Luis Obispo. In fact, he led the statewide effort to create landscape standards, has been very helpful to the county and to other communities. Pavo is very soon going to be head of the entire Public Works Department for the county government. And he has coordinated this integrated water management plan. And also they created a Water Resource Advisory Committee, which I work with. And that has representatives from all of the cities in the county, as well as the larger universities, the community service districts, the prison. Almost everybody you can think of is on board.
Well,
and it also includes agricultural interest and environmental interest. And I think that, part of the efforts of developing cooperation are really understanding the perspectives of all of them. A good example was, again, in the development of the Nacimiento project, a lot of the environmental constituents were concerned that if that was a treated water supply, Nacimiento to the city of San Luis Obispo, then it would provide a urban amenity to any of the property between the lake and the city of San Luis Obispo. So our environmental constituents really wanted it to be what we call a raw water supply.
And then clean it there.
Yeah, and then each of the agencies is individually responsible for making sure that it meets
Also, somebody along the way can't stick a plug in and get just water for their house.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, is there any area in the county that's in worse shape than others, or any area that's in better shape that we don't have to really worry about, or?
Well, I would say as an entire region, the San Luis Obispo County is in better shape than a lot of regions throughout the state of California. And part of that is just simply the development in our county has happened a lot later. And so over the decades, our elected officials and water resource managers can kind of look to the mistakes that have been made in other portions of the state and hopefully help make sure that they don't get repeated. Plus we had foresight, in the 1950s on the Nacimiento project, and so that has helped. But do we still have challenges in this county? Yes. Los Osos is a good example where there is seawater intrusion. You have 3 different companies that provide water supply to the community. The need for them to really, roll up their sleeves and get to work on how those problems are going to be solved is critical. Cambria, I believe, has been addressing their issues, but again, with the permitting challenges and cost impacts of desalinization, that continues to be a challenge up in Cambria. I think that Mike Wynn and the Nipomo Community Services District are doing a great job in looking to and leading the development of solutions down in the South County, in the Mesa area. The 5 cities area is okay.
Because of Lopez.
Because of Lopez, yeah. And North County is okay, both because of a large groundwater basin as well as the importation of Nacimiento. Again, some problem spots in the North County. But solutions are being worked on, and the Nacimiento project will certainly help with those. And the city of San Luis Obispo certainly was in dire need for an additional water supply and motivated to participate in Nacimiento as well. So there are solutions in the works for especially some of the major municipalities in our area, but yet we still do have some challenge areas. For example, Santa Margarita, the community of Santa Margarita, doesn't really sit over the Paso Robles groundwater basin, yet they pump from wells. They're okay in normal years, but in drought periods, they are definitely subject to risks. And in the last drought, we at the county had to put them under mandatory conservation as well.
You can't get any other water to them, though, where they're located. There's no way of, well, that in a disaster, is there any way of sharing water?
Well, certainly when there's disasters and emergencies, then the door's open for cooperation. If it's a normal year in and year out thing, then it requires contracts and everybody to agree on what their fair share of costs are. But Morro Bay is probably a good example where if they weren't in an emergency, but they were very concerned because contamination to some of their well fields had really reduced their ability to pump wells. And so they worked with the county, the California Men's Colony, in order to make sure that if needed, they could get some water out of whale rock as well. So
there, in disasters you can.
Yes, yeah.
However, if we had a real biggie, like Nacimiento pipeline broke at the same time the state water outlet broke, we would just.
Yeah, in California, certainly large earthquakes are still our biggest risk for damages. In those situations, then individuals are going to have to really cut back on their water consumption, focusing in on health and safety needs so that the facilities can get repaired.
Well, and you're hopeful that that can be done. Your reading of the believing of the behavior of people is positive enough that you feel that the community will, if asked by its people to conserve, will.
I think they will, Adele, but I think we have another problem that's creeping up on us that will be very, very challenging to solve. And that is that we have many people in this community, in this county for that matter, that live on limited income, whether they're retired on limited income or they're just in the beginning working years or whatever. How are we going to have affordable housing and low-cost housing if the cost of water and the infrastructure to support it are going to continue rising and rising and rising? If our water bills go up 4 times, as is possible over the next decade, how will we afford to have affordable housing?
Well, how will we afford water? But that's another question. I've just read someplace that people can vote not to have their rates raised. Who's going to vote to let their water rates go up, and how are you going to get the money you need to build water plants if you can't raise the rates?
Well, Prop 218 says that they get to vote, and basically you can have a protest vote where you'd have to have at least 51% or 50 plus 1 that said no. But if people consistently voted no to raise their rates, then an agency has to cut back on service to those people so that they can afford to pay for the services they have. So very strict water could be required by law if you simply wouldn't pay for the necessary maintenance and upkeep.
So I was wondering, now when it comes to the low-cost housing, they would have to be metered the same as everybody else at the same rate for, I mean, you wouldn't want somebody in low-cost housing to be able to waste water just because they were poor. So, but then you would have to have supplemental funds to help pay their bills, is what you're saying.
Well, not really, but what you can have instead is a 3-tier or 4-tier rate structure so the people that are very frugal will pay a lower rate and use less water. And if there are people who wish to use great amounts of water, they simply will pay a higher rate for that water.
Well, but you could also not let them use great amounts of water. Couldn't you, in other words, with mandatory rationing, wouldn't you say that you still can't use it? Even if you can afford it, you really aren't allowed to wash your street.
Well, and those are all the different types of tools that are sort of in our toolbox to help manage our water resources. The idea that in the county-operated water systems, where we're actually the purveyor of water to individual homes, our rate structures are such that there's a lifeline, what we call the lifeline amount. It provides a minimum quantity of water to individuals in order to meet their basic health and safety needs, and quite frankly, some outdoor water usage, but not a lot. And then they get the minimum monthly bill. And then those who use more water have to pay an additional amount. And as Mike said, there's multiple tiers, so that people who are using a lot of additional water start paying a lot more money for it.
Well, there used to be during 2 droughts ago, because I've been here for a couple of droughts, they started gray water for plants. And then there was a lot of trouble with that. Is it still on the books that you can use gray water for plants?
You can use gray water in this county. and Pavel can speak more to that. But I can say that there are health issues that must be addressed. You simply don't want to dump water that's going to cause damage either to the land itself or create an environment for disease.
During the last drought, the state of California updated its plumbing code.
Yes.
And in the plumbing code that currently exists, there are specific standards on how you have to go about to develop a gray water system. I rebuilt my house in the city of San Luis Obispo a number of years ago, and when I did that, I did what we call dual plumbing, and that is the plumbing from the sinks and the showers come out of the house in one spot, and then of course the water from the kitchen and from the toilets, those come out at a different spot, and that directly goes to the sewer system. And I did that, and I got that incorporated into my permit on my rebuild project so that I could be set up to do a gray water system. In addressing the health and safety issues that Mike points to, the sort of the bottom line is that you're not supposed to use gray water on the surface. You're supposed to use gray water subsurface, and you can do that through a number of different techniques. But they don't want gray water to pool up where contaminants can breed bacterias and where kids or pets or animals can go and then drink and be in contact with that water.
Okay.
So,
Well, this is, like I said, but it's something, there are rules, or there's something else to think about in the conservation and the reuse of water. It's like secondary sewer water is being used to water things from the sewer plants, which is also keeping regular potable water from having to be used for water things.
yeah, in the city of San Luis
In
Obispo.
San Luis Obispo, they're doing that,
Yes.
and can be done other places. Well, it's the most exciting thing to me is that people are going to learn to work together. I think that is absolutely fabulous. If this brings that out, they say quite often when there is a problem, people learn to work together. Is there anything else you want to add before we close this final segment? Not to say that if it isn't solved in the next few years, we won't come back again and talk about water again. I sincerely hope that there is something done now so we don't have to worry about it again. But is there anything else you gentlemen want to add?
Well, the truth is that we just had a survey completed for Napomo, and under all scenarios, we will be pumping below seawater by the year 2019. So we don't have a lot of time. If you think that a desal plant will take 8 to 10 years, maybe, and who knows how long it'll take to get regulation, we really do have to step on it. We can't let this thing sort of coast along at a slow pace.
Okay, I'm with you. What
And
about you?
I gave some good examples of cooperation that have led to some
Yes.
good recent solutions. I think it's important to know, though, that once we have one problem solved on water in this county or in the state of California, the next problem pops up. So I appreciate you having us on the show today to talk about these issues.
Well, we're so glad you came because, you see, the League, as I said, in 2000 was the first time we did it on this show. We've had a position, we've studied water in all the 40 years, 50, 60 years I've been in California. There was an old joke that might make people angry that if God had really had enough money, he'd have done it right in the first place. We'd have had plenty of wells and plenty of pipelines. But obviously he didn't make Southern California as wet as Northern. And Southern California's been battling it for years. And now there's still another battle going on with the Delta.
Yes.
We don't know the results of that and how it'll impact on us. But with gentlemen like you worrying about it, I'm going to feel much better. I'm still going to be careful what I use water on. I thank you so much.